Welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I am your host, Brad Swale. Today, I am joined by best-selling author, former Austin City Councilwoman, and current Representative Ellen Troxclair of Texas, House District 19. Representative Troxclair, how are you?
I'm doing great. We're just getting started on what is hopefully going to be an impressively effective legislative session. So
I have no doubt that it will be very effective. Is it busier now? Is it less busy now at the beginning, or is it more busy now?
well, we have a new speaker, so the it's busier than normal, and my hope is that we get to work more quickly than we have in the past. So, I'm here. I'm raring to go.
Good. Well, I don't know that I've ever wished more work upon someone, but you're asking for it, so I hope you get started soon.
Yep, let's go.
Let's talk about some of the legislation that you're getting behind and that you're excited about this legislative session. One of them being the K through 12 smart device ban in classrooms, which I think is HB 515. This is something that I think has been on people's minds a lot recently over the past maybe year or so with the decline in mental health in students and everything like that. Why are you filing? Why are you behind this?
Just after, I'm a mom in addition to being a legislator. And so, luckily my kids are 8 and under. So I have more information about the horrible addiction that social media poses to our kids and the detrimental mental health impacts. This book, Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation, came out, I guess, about a year ago and really just outlined the new data in a way that is absolutely hard to ignore. So, bottom line is, average American teen is spending 5+ hours on social media every single day, and suicide rates have tripled. So, there is an increasing amount of evidence that there is a direct correlation to depression, self-harm, and suicide among our teens. And we never really had a community conversation about whether or not it's appropriate to have those devices in a classroom. I mean, you would laugh in my face if I said, "Hey, we should have all our kids bring their own personal TVs to school and put them out on the desk while the teacher is trying to teach," right? And yet, that's exactly what we've done and
Yeah.
more. And so, really, my bill, House Bill 515, it just says from bell to bell, phones should be locked away, either in a backpack or in a locker. And when you're at school, you're there to learn math, science, reading, and writing, and to socialize with your peers, not to be using your phone for bullying or cheating or social media addiction.
So, I've heard you talk about this over the past several months, and I know that since the legislative session has just started, I'm wondering, has your idea sort of developed over time? Have you had to massage it or adjust it here and there, and if so, how?
Really, honestly, it's maintained relatively the same. If anything, I've just gotten more and more support. It's nice that this is a kind of a issue that sees across the political spectrum. So I have support not just from Republicans and Democrats, but also from parents, teachers, administrators, superintendents, and that is rare in in the legislative process to have something that is so widely supportive. I do want to make sure that we can find funding, that we provide funding if at all possible, which I think it is possible, for schools who maybe don't have the budget to invest in a Yonder pouch or something similar, if that's what they choose to use to implement this. And so I'm working with my colleagues to make sure that it's clear that this is not an unfunded mandate, but rather that the school districts have complete support from the state in their efforts to get classrooms to be back about teaching.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, we're just continuing the coalition, continuing to answer questions. Law enforcement has really come out pretty strong in favor of it, because sometimes I get questions, what happens in the case of an emergency? And law enforcement has been very clear that this helps them respond more efficiently and effectively to emergencies, and just quelling some fears from some parents who say, "Well, how do I get a hold of my kid?" You do it the same way you get a hold of your elementary school kid, or that we were always or that we experienced when we were growing up, which is, you call if there's something that's important that they need to be interrupted for, you call the school and get a note to your child. So I think it's just a process of making sure that those concerns are addressed up front. And ultimately, I think this is one of the biggest things that we can do to solve or help solve our mental health crisis and put us back on a path for our kids to be kids again.
Yeah, so I was going to ask what the reaction from parents and teachers in your district has been. I mean, I listen to this conversation quite a bit through, social media or radio or podcast or whatever, and it seems like there is an issue of pushback from parents, highlighting what you described.
Mhm.
How am I supposed to get in touch with my child if I needed to? And of course, I think to myself, I don't remember my parents ever getting in touch with me when I was in school, but whatever.
Mhm.
So has it been generally positive from the constituents?
Yes, and it really helps that we have probably 2 dozen school districts who have gone ahead and implemented this. And the results have been overwhelmingly positive. Like 100% of teachers in Richardson ISD said it was a change for the better. That's again rare. You don't have 100% of teachers agreeing on
Sure.
of anybody agreeing on anything. And so, and even the parents and students who were at first apprehensive about change ultimately realize, oh my gosh, this is so much better for, the kids say, yeah, I'm having conversations with my friends again. And the parents realize that they can still get in touch with their child, and hopefully their child is less addicted to their digital device, even when they're not in school. So those benefits are proving themselves from the pilot programs that are already happening.
Yeah, and I imagine beyond just mental health, allowing kids to, or I guess forcing kids to focus more on the schoolwork ahead of them, we might see a turnaround in some of the decline in education performance as well.
That's
But
right.
I want to ask about local government accountability.
Yes,
You're
my other favorite topic.
I mean, it is certainly the top of my list as well. As former Austin City Councilwoman, I'm sure that you're intimately familiar with local government and how it works. Last session, you filed HB 3899 to
Yep.
address Austin's Project Connect and sort of that funding scheme. Is that something that you're pursuing again this session?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and the thing there, people want to make it about rail. What it's really about is that you can't use yearly property tax revenue to fund debt on long-term projects. That's what bonds are for. So all the bill says is you got to use a bond if you're going to build a long-term, a 30 plus year project. You can't use an in perpetuity property tax assessment. That's not something that exists to say like, property taxes are set every single year. You cannot say a local government cannot say we're going to increase your property taxes 20% into perpetuity. And so I'm hopeful that passed the House and the Senate. It ultimately died on a point of order when it came back to the House, but I mean, obviously there is widespread support in both chambers for this change, and hopefully we'll get it across the finish line this time.
So, you mentioned that you can't, that part of the reason is you don't want the cities can't use property taxes to fund large scale bond infrastructure packages.
Mhm.
Maybe one of your colleagues or a supporter of something like this is listening. Why is that a problem?
Well, that you can't use short-term revenue for long-term projects.
Sure. I mean, I don't know that everyone thinks of property taxes as a short term revenue is what I mean. Like
Oh, well, taxing authority is very strictly regulated in state law, and that's to protect taxpayers from, wildly spending local government. So there's reasonable, just guardrails in place, and one of the most important guardrails is that the budget is set every year, right? So your tax rate, any taxing entity is setting their tax rate and estimating their revenue on a year-to-year basis. And if they go over a 3.5% increase, they must go back to the taxpayers and ask permission to raise taxes above 3.5%. Um, And in this case, they've totally, the city has totally thrown that out the window and said, actually, we're going to go above this limit, and we're going to ask you once, but we're not going to ask you every single year. And so it's almost like taking from, your weekly food budget as a family get to buy a mansion and have a long-term mortgage on a house that you actually can't afford. And so it's kind of, you're mixing a checking account and a long-term savings account in a way that is extremely poor financial policy and would never be tolerated in any private sector scheme. It's just this darn public sector that keeps trying to get into the taxpayer pockets by any means possible. So, I'll look forward to continuing the conversation on that, but there is definitely something that needs to be addressed there.
So, I mean, on that specific project, obviously there's a lot of lawsuits going on and everything that I'm sure you're familiar with. And I think the thrust of it is basically the voters were sold one thing and now it's kind of
Right.
something else, right? It's a scaled back project and it's not what the voters voted for, I think is the argument. Is there something that the legislature could do on a statewide basis to sort of protect taxpayers from something like that if they vote on something and it changes? I don't know what the standard might be, what the right terminology might be, but if it changes a significant degree one way or another, there's some sort of protection that needs to be in place.
Well, that's exactly the protections are already in place when you do a bond, right? When you do a bond, you have to put in the ballot language, this is how much we're borrowing. We're going to borrow 4 billion. It's going to be spent in this way, and you have to tell the voters how much of a property how much of a tax increase it's going to be, and exactly there's strict bounds, and you have to stay within those bounds. What you put on the ballot, you kind of have to stay within. Again, the problem is that they didn't do a bond. They did this other weird workaround, and that meant that those taxpayer protections went out the window. So this bill would address the exact thing to make sure that taxpayers aren't bait and switched, and that they're receiving what they were sold,
Yeah.
what they're paying
So,
for.
yeah. So homelessness is obviously a big issue in Austin and a growing issue in other cities, not only across Texas, but across the country. Um, and thankfully, thankfully the homeless issue here in Austin, I think it came after your tenure, so it's not on your record. It's after that for sure. But one of the groups that has testified to the Senate from Austin is the Other Ones Foundation, who operates Camp Esperanza. My understanding is that you were instrumental in their formation. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I knew that part of the root cause of homelessness is when people, not only do they have a catastrophic, usually loss of family, but they've also kind of lost their dignity, their purpose. And so I started a pilot program when I was on the city council that allowed for us to pay in cash daily work, homeless people who wanted to be put to work for the day, get a hot lunch, get cash at the end of the day, and receive a little dignity, provide them the dignity of work, rather than just standing on a street corner asking people for money to be earning that money. And so that pilot program was wildly successful, so much so that has now been expanded, and I'm happy to see that there's that creative way to kind of solve multiple problems at once has done some good for some people. And the testimonials, from the people who have been helped by the program are very heartwarming, and hopefully it helped them get back on their feet.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's obviously Haven for Hope down in San Antonio, which is often seen as the premier homeless center, assistance center in Texas. I believe that Senator Tan Parker and the Lieutenant Governor are working on some sort of Haven for Hope bill, maybe to implement similar programs across the state. Is that something you think you would support?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think homelessness, gosh, the severity, it's gotten so much worse just because of the decisions that the Austin City Council and others have made. And so anything that has been proven to be effective and is a good public-private partnership and can get people back on their feet and just break the cycle of poverty and homelessness, like that's a win-win. So be interested to follow up more with him about that.
Sure. So let's go to taxpayer-funded lobbying. This is something that I know has been filed so many times, and I just it doesn't seem to pass. I spoke with Senator Middleton just the other day, and I know that he's working on this as well. Do you think that this is the year that a ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying gets passed?
I do. I really do. I
What
think we
form
have
do
a
you think that'll come
new,
in?
yeah, what?
What
What
form do you
form?
think? Yeah.
Well, I filed the companion bill to Senator Middleton's bill to make sure that tax dollars are not being spent to hire outside contract lobbyists who come in and lobby on behalf of mainly the big liberal cities and kill a bunch of conservative legislation. It has been a topic of conversation in the legislature for quite some time now. I'm encouraged that our new speaker, Dustin Burrows, has always been a supporter of that, and I hope I expect that he will continue to support it. But ultimately, we have a responsibility to protect the Texas Miracle and the low tax, reasonable regulatory environment and the freedom that we all enjoy here. And so there is a responsibility of the state to make sure that freedom is not undone by local governments who are intent on, overregulating and overtaxing. And so, unfortunately, it's not an even playing field when. Especially so many of these fights are urban versus rural, and I represent a lot of rural communities as well. And I think once they realize there's been so much misinformation on this topic. But at least the local leaders in my rural communities have now woken up to the fact that they are sometimes used as pawns in the capital, and they are used to protect the bad decisions of the bigger cities. And honestly, taxpayer-funded lobbying ha puts them at a disadvantage, right? Because they're not the ones. There's no one in Johnson City, Texas, is not coming in spending $1 million a year on hired guns to go kill conservative legislation. The city of Austin is, and so that puts them at an extreme disadvantage. So I think once those misconceptions have been corrected, you see broadened support for it. And yeah, I mean, this is a no-brainer. The amount of money that's coming directly from, yours and my pockets that is used against us is just insane. So there has been a little bit of a learning curve in this particular bill, but I think this is a session. We have a great new class of freshmen that are coming in that are pretty committed to this topic as well. So I think this is the year that it'll happen.
Do you think that, or would it be effective immediately? When do you think that, how does that work?
Well, it would be their bills are drafted to be effective September 1st,
Okay.
unless they receive two-thirds. So I don't know that this one will be one that can get two-thirds, but if it passes, the expectation would be it would be effective well in advance of the next legislative session.
Yeah, I think, and this is just to play devil's advocate a little bit. I think the city of Austin would say that they have a right to, to lobby in their interests, just like anybody else, right? What would you say to them when they say that? What's the counter to that?
Yeah, they do. They do have a right to lobby, and that's why they all have my cell phone number. And any local elected official can communicate directly with their state representative. In fact, they are the best advocates, right? Rather than saying, "Hey, go talk to somebody else." And I think the other issue is that there's not a lot of transparency with what exactly is being done. And so once taxpayers realize, when I talk to somebody in Austin, they often complain about the cost of living, their property taxes, the affordability crisis. And when you start to talk to them about how their money is being spent, again, regardless of their Republican or Democrat, they think that that is not a good use of their money.
Yeah.
And so, I just, especially in Austin, where, as a city council member, I could come to the Capitol anytime I wanted, and I did frequently testify in favor or in opposition to bills at the Capitol. So actually, they have the most access of anybody, just because of the fact that the Capitol is located in Austin, and so would just encourage our local elected officials to. Use their organizations, of course, the Texas Municipal League and Texas Association of Counties for information, for advocacy, for education, for bill alerts, all those things. They just can't hire a taxpayer-funded lobbyist. And this is very similar to the way the Council of Governments work. So we have COGs, as they're called, set up across the state that are kind of the Central Texas COG handles emergency services, things that kind of cross traditional municipal or county lines. And they already have the same restriction. They come and they advocate and they talk to their legislators, but they don't hire paid lobbyists to influence legislation. And so I just wanted them to operate the same. Same thing with our agencies. TxDOT is a resource. They or DPS, that we can ask them questions, they can provide us information. They can tell us, yes, this is how I would do it if I was in charge. But we don't use state money for those agencies to go out and hire lobbyists. And so we just have the same reasonable expectation for cities and counties and any taxpayer entity as well.
Yeah. So I want to be respectful of your time. There's a couple more things I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
One of them being universal basic income. I believe that last session you filed a bill against that. I was looking at I think it's illegal in Texas, but I was looking at the Austin City Council agenda for next week. I think it's, I don't know, the 30th or something like that of January. And it's universal basic income and all but name. So it seems like it's still happening. I'm not really sure. Is that illegal in Texas? Does further legislation need to be filed? What's going on with that?
Oh, yeah. Well, the bill did not pass last session, but Senator Betancourt and I have refiled it again this session, and we'll be doing everything we can to make sure it passes. It's terrible policy. It doesn't work. It makes the cost of living more expensive for everyone and pushes out the middle class, the people who can least afford it. And so we've got to get away from this idea that money grows on trees and that we can give it out freely to people regardless of whether they're looking for work or in the workforce. And there's a lot better uses of that money. And
Sure.
so hopefully we will get that one across the finish line this time.
I think it's called the Family Stabilization Grant Fund is what it is in Austin, I think. So you're also filing the Women's Bill of Rights. What does that do?
So Women's Bill of Rights defines once and for all what a man is and what a woman is, because it seems that there's still confusion about that.
Sure.
I'm glad to see that that President Trump is on top of this as well. But we should not have young women being forced to undress in front of males in private spaces like locker rooms. And there are certain benefits that are outlined specifically for women in state law. And we just need to make sure that we're protecting women, women's rights and women's spaces, and the Women's Bill of Rights will do that.
Yeah. Well, Representative Ellen Troxclair, I know you're busy representing House District 19. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Brad. Always a pleasure.